I want to start today by asking you a question. And I want you to be really honest with yourself as you think about the answer. How often do you get to the end of your day or the end of your week and just feel completely hollowly exhausted?
Oh, I mean, that is a universal feeling right there.
Yeah, right. And I am not talking about the good kind of tired that comes after a long hike or finishing a big project. I mean, that bone deep depletion where it feels like modern life has just taken a straw and siphoned out every ounce of your energy, your patience, and your spirit.
We definitely all know that modern burnout feeling.
We do. But what if there is a fundamental, almost structural difference between feeling completely drained by the world and intentionally pouring your life out for something greater?
That distinction, it changes the entire landscape of how we view our daily lives. It is the defining line between being a passive victim of your circumstances, where life just happens to you, and being an active participant in a much larger, much more beautiful narrative.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a really fascinating piece of source material today. It is a song and its accompanying devotional concept called Poured Out.
Right, by the artist, A Journey with Destiny.
Exactly, featured on the EP Redeemer of My Story. And our mission for this deep dive isn't to just critique a piece of music or, talk about chord progressions. We're taking these lyrics and the devotional writing behind them and using them as a lens to examine what it actually means to be poured out for God.
Yeah, we're exploring those really heavy concepts of surrender, obedience, worship, and discovering why a life that is surrendered is never actually a life that is wasted.
And we should probably establish the tone of this material right up front because it's distinct.
It
It really reads like someone who has had to grieve the loss of their own plans to embrace something else. And you see that tension immediately in the opening lines of the song.
the very first verse.
Right. It starts with, "You shaped my hands before I knew their worth. You gave me breath to bring heaven to earth." That immediately flips how our culture usually dictates value, doesn't it?
It is a total inversion. I mean, in a hyper-individualistic capitalist culture, we are aggressively taught that our worth is tied directly to our utility.
Right. What can you produce?
Exactly. What is your output? What can you achieve by the time you're 30? But these opening lines establish the foundational premise of the entire devotional. Our gifts, our hands, our very breath are not self-generated.
They were shaped with profound intention before we even had the capacity to understand their value or do anything useful with them.
You didn't earn your worth. It was entrusted to you.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If society demands utility, and we are told our worth is inherent and entrusted to us to bring heaven to earth, how do we reconcile that practically? It sounds like my life isn't just my own little project to manage anymore.
That is exactly the friction the artist is leaning into. If your breath is borrowed, you are a steward, not an owner.
A steward.
Right, and that realization requires a massive shift in how you operate, which is perfectly illustrated by the biblical imagery woven into the chorus and the second verse. The lyrics say, "Let the fragrance of my worship rise, a holy offering, a living sacrifice."
But wait, isn't living sacrifice an oxymoron? We hear that phrase so often in modern contexts that I think it loses its edge. How did a first century audience even process that idea?
It would have been a jarring, almost offensive paradox to them. If we connect this to the bigger picture, that phrase is a direct reference to Romans 12.1, where the Apostle Paul urges believers to offer their bodies as a living sacrifice.
Because in the ancient world, across almost all cultures, the entire concept of a sacrifice meant something died.
Right. You brought an animal or a grain offering to the altar, and its existence as you knew it ended right there.
But a living sacrifice, by definition, has the ability to just crawl right back off the altar when the fire gets too hot.
Precisely. It means surrender is not a one-time final event where you check a box and move on.
Yeah.
It is an ongoing, daily, sometimes minute-by-minute yielding of the will. A
Wow.
living sacrifice requires waking up every single morning and making the conscious decision to lay your desires, your ambitions, and your right to be in control back down on the altar. It is an active, continuous state of surrender.
It's easy to talk about bringing heaven to earth conceptually, but the artist immediately grounds this in something much more uncomfortable and historical in the next line. "The oil I bring, it's all I own."
Yes, the oil.
Here's where it gets really interesting because this isn't just a poetic metaphor about nice-smelling oil. This points to a very specific, culturally loaded moment.
It links directly to the historical account in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7. The setting is a dinner party at the house of a prominent religious leader, a Pharisee. Jesus is a guest there.
And suddenly, a woman who the town considers a sinner.
Someone completely marginalized and uninvited.
Right. She enters the room. She brings an alabaster jar of incredibly expensive perfumed oil. She breaks it open, weeping, washes Jesus' feet with her tears, wipes them with her hair, and pours this costly oil on him.
And to really understand the gravity of that lyric, that "it's all I own" part, we have to talk about the socioeconomic reality of a first-century woman. That alabaster jar wasn't just a luxury item she picked up on a whim.
No.
In that era, a jar of pure nard like that could represent a year's wages. For a woman who had very few economic rights, this was often her life savings. It was her dowry, her future security. It was quite literally her safety net.
Which makes the physical act of what she did so staggering. She didn't just uncork it, pour a few polite drops, and save the rest for a rainy day.
No, the text implies she shattered the seal.
Mhm.
She broke the neck of the jar.
You cannot put the oil back once that happens.
You can't. Breaking it open and pouring it out looked utterly foolish, even economically reckless, to the religious men sitting around that table. They immediately started whispering about the waste.
They were calculating the market value of the oil.
Exactly. While Jesus was looking at the posture of her heart. To him, it was an act of ultimate, beautiful reverence.
So, what does this all mean for you listening right now? The question this deep dive forces us to ask ourselves is, what is your alabaster jar?
That's the real question.
What is the valuable thing you are gripping so tightly? I am definitely guilty of treating my life like a heavily guarded fortress, complete with a 5-year plan moat and a color-coded spreadsheet drawbridge. Maybe for you, it's your time.
Or your reputation.
Right, your reputation, your right to be angry at someone who deeply hurt you, or just your fundamental need to control your own narrative. We all have that jar. And breaking it feels terrifying because it is objectively costly.
The devotional material doesn't shy away from that cost. There is a particularly heavy lyric where the artist writes, "Every dream, every spark you've placed within, I lay it down and start again."
I lay it down and start again. I remember a time when my own meticulously crafted career plan completely fell apart, and the realization that I had to start over felt like a physical weight. Let's be honest about the psychology of this. Obedience sometimes feels like losing.
It really does.
When you have a dream, even a good, healthy, seemingly God-given spark, and you feel the gentle but firm prompt to lay it down, it hurts. Surrendering that dream feels like grief.
It is grief. And recognizing that grief is what helps us understand the profound difference between being drained and being poured out, which you mentioned at the very beginning of our conversation.
Yeah, let's go back to that.
When you are drained, it is a passive, often toxic experience. It is what happens to you when the endless demands of life, the anxieties of the 24-hour news cycle, and the pressures of your own ambitions siphon your energy aimlessly. You are like a tire with a slow puncture, just going flat while driving down the highway.
But being poured out requires a completely different mechanism.
It requires intention. Being poured out is a voluntary offering made by you. You are choosing to take the vessel of your life and deliberately tip it over.
As the pre-chorus outlines, it's not about what I can do, it's what you're doing through me too.
Exactly. When you are drained, you feel empty, cynical, and used up. When you are poured out, you still feel empty, but you are empty for a purpose. You have intentionally made room for something else to fill that space.
It's the difference between accidentally spilling a glass of priceless wine on the floor and intentionally pouring it out for an honored guest. Both leave the glass completely empty, but one is a tragic waste and the other is a beautiful offering.
That's a perfect analogy.
And this completely reframes the concept of surrender from a narrative of loss to a narrative of trust.
This raises an important question about biblical trust, and we see it modeled perfectly in 2 Timothy 4:6. The Apostle Paul is at the very end of his life. He is sitting in a cold Roman prison, facing imminent execution by the state. And he writes to his protege, "I am already being poured out like a drink offering."
Notice his framing there.
Right. He didn't say, "The Roman Empire has violently taken my life from me," or "I've lost everything." He framed his impending unjust death as an offering he was actively choosing to give.
When you pour out your life, you aren't losing it to the void. You are placing it in the hands of the one who can actually do something eternal with it.
That requires a terrifying amount of faith.
Because physics dictates that when you pour a liquid out, you cannot gather it back up. You can't change your mind halfway through. You have to implicitly trust the hands you are pouring it into.
Which transitions us into a part of the song that moves away from these grand, dramatic, historical moments into something incredibly intimate.
The bridge.
Yes. In the bridge, the artist sings, every note, every prayer, every tear, you're always there.
Those lyrics are a necessary pivot. They move us from the dramatic moments of martyrdom or shattering life savings into the deeply personal, quiet realities of daily faith.
True surrender rarely happens on a brightly lit stage with a microphone and an adoring audience. It happens in secret. It is the quiet strength of faithfulness that no one else ever claps for or recognizes.
It is the unseen prayers you whisper in the school pickup line when you are totally overwhelmed. It is the tears you cry in your car when you are completely confused about the path ahead, but you make the decision to stay faithful anyway.
The song specifically mentions every heartbeat, every lift of my hand as worship.
Our modern culture is obsessively focused on being perceived. If an act of service isn't documented, if a moment of vulnerability doesn't have an audience on social media, we are conditioned to feel like it didn't really happen or didn't matter.
Yet the devotional argues that the artist sees the secret surrender. And not only does he see it, but he uses it as the very material for transformation. In that same bridge, we hear, you're the artist, I'm the clay, shape my heart your perfect way.
When the artist calls God the potter, they aren't talking about a gentle, relaxing arts and crafts project. True molding requires friction.
It does. Think about the realities of a pottery wheel. The clay is pressed, centered with force, and sometimes, if there is a fundamental flaw or an air bubble that threatens the integrity of the vessel, the potter has to collapse the whole thing and rebuild it from scratch.
Allowing another will to mold, press, and reshape you, especially in the dark where no one else understands the painful process you are going through, that is the ultimate picture of a yielded life.
It demands immense trust to believe that the hands applying that intense pressure are doing it to shape you, not to crush you out of malice. And the psychological and spiritual reward for that trust is found in the core promise of the song, which contains arguably the most comforting lines in the whole track.
Nothing wasted, nothing lost. You've redeemed it at the cross.
And later, you waste no piece of who I've been.
You waste no piece of who I've been. For anyone listening who feels burdened by regret, the psychological relief of a lyric like that is profound. It shifts the narrative.
No, so.
If you feel like you have wasted years of your life, maybe running in the opposite direction of where you were supposed to go, maybe holding on to a bitter grudge, maybe just making colossal mistakes, this concept offers a radical reset. When we hand our lives over to be poured out, we aren't just handing over our shiny, successful, curated moments.
We're handing over the broken pieces, the failures, the deep grief.
Because God's economy operates on a completely different set of principles than ours.
It really does. In human economics, a broken vessel is useless. Its value plummets to zero and it gets discarded. In the divine economy, the broken pieces are the exact raw materials required to create something beautiful.
The cross is presented as the ultimate proof of this thesis.
It was the most brutal, agonizing, seemingly tragic waste of a perfect life in human history. But it was redeemed to become the mechanism of salvation for the world. Because of the cross, the concept of waste is entirely redefined.
The song captures that divine multiplication beautifully in the pre-chorus. Your spirit breathes on what I give and makes it more than I could live. You turn the simple into grace. Your presence fills this humble place.
When we bring our simple, humble, deeply flawed pieces to him, he breathes on them. It's the miracle of the loaves and fishes happening on a microscopic level within our own souls.
But we have to ask how this translates to Tuesday morning. Being a living sacrifice cannot just remain a lofty theological concept. It has to have practical traction.
So let's get really practical about what being poured out looks like today for you, the listener.
It looks like choosing to serve your family or your coworkers with kindness when you are running on 2 hours of sleep and your patience is gone.
Yeah. It looks like making the agonizing choice to forgive that person who never offered you an apology because you realize that holding on to the bitterness is keeping your hands too full to be poured out for God.
It looks like continuing to show up faithfully in your quiet, unglamorous calling, even when the results are invisible and you feel completely unappreciated. It is trusting that, as the lyric says, the author is writing his story deep within you, even when you can't read the page.
It is the daily, sometimes hourly decision to say, I am exhausted. My alabaster jar feels incredibly heavy today. But what I have, I am deliberately pouring out.
And knowing that when you make that conscious choice, that humble offering is transformed into grace, you aren't losing your life to the void, you are allowing it to be redeemed.
I want to look closely at the very end of the song because there is a subtle but deeply meaningful lyrical shift in the outro that ties this all together.
Throughout the entire track, in every chorus, the artist sings, "Take this life, take this song, it's yours, it's yours."
But when the track reaches its final soaring climax, the words change. It becomes, take this heart, take this song, it's yours, all over.
Yours all along. That is the grand, humbling realization of the surrendered life.
We spend an exhausting amount of energy white-knuckling our plans, defending our territory, and protecting our alabaster jars. We act as if surrendering them to God is this massive favor we are doing for Him, giving Him something foreign that rightfully belongs to us.
But the ultimate revelation of this devotional is that everything we are trying so desperately to protect already belongs to Him. Surrender is not a transaction. It is a return.
A return.
When we finally let go, we aren't giving up our ownership. We are simply acknowledging His. It takes an incredible amount of pressure off your shoulders. You don't have to defend your life so fiercely when you finally realize it was never yours to protect in the first place.
And that realization is where true, lasting freedom is found. The absolute exhaustion of trying to be the author, the sustainer, the defender, and the protector of your own life melts away when you can honestly look at your circumstances and say, take this heart. It was yours all along.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Poured Out, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something a little different to take with you into whatever you are doing next.
We have spent this time talking about surrender, as laying down the pen and letting the artist take over.
But if surrender truly means letting go of the pen, what would it look like for you to wake up tomorrow and simply read the story God is writing for you, rather than frantically trying to edit the pages as they happen?
That requires stepping back and trusting the narrative arc, even when the current chapter feels unresolved or painful.
We all have a finite amount of time, energy, and love to give. Your life is going to be spent on something. It will be poured out somehow. The world will gladly drain you dry if you let it, taking your energy for things that won't last and won't remember your name in 100 years.
So if your life is going to be spent anyway, why not let it be an intentional, fragrant offering to the one who shaped your hands before you even knew their worth?
The invitation here is clear. Move from being passively drained by the temporary demands of the world to being actively poured out for the eternal.
Could be a beautiful invitation.
So today, right where you are, whether you are driving or working or just sitting quietly, I invite you to physically unclench your fists. Take a deep breath. Whatever alabaster jar you are carrying right now, your fears, your need for control, your hidden dreams, your unseen peers, trust the artist with it. Let him shape the clay. Let your life be poured out, knowing with absolute certainty that in his hands, nothing is wasted and nothing is lost.